Thank you, Isabel, and thank you everybody for turning up and for inviting me to come along here today. Sound coming through okay, Ben? Good. I want to start off by saying I'm pretty certain that nearly everybody will have no problem with me saying that the issue of abortion is by far the most important human rights issue at the moment throughout the world, and possibly of any time, but certainly at this present time. It's the most important issue of social justice. It's the most important issue of human rights, largely because of the scale of it, the scale of the problem, the numbers, but also the effect that it has on not only the obvious sort of physical effects, but the spiritual effect. And it's something that, this 40 Days for Life is a wonderful movement, and as are any of the other pro-life movements that do what they can to help people caught up in the whole industry. One of the problems, and I'm sure most of you are very much aware of this, is words, terminology, the way that people describe the whole issue. So euphemisms, a euphemism by definition is a word or a phrase used to hide the real meaning of something, and particularly in relation to abortion, it's often it's a phrase or a choice of words used to make the unacceptable acceptable. And that it's not the first time in history, of course, that this sort of ploy is being used, but that's very much what the people who are proponents of abortion, they use very much to try and convince the rest of society that maybe it's not such a bad thing after all. And unfortunately, that has been very, very successful, particularly over the last 40, 50 years in this country and in most of the Western civilization and throughout the world. Of course, I mentioned that it's not the first time in history. If I said the final solution to the Jewish question, it's a very polite way, and it was actually used in the 1930s and early 40s by the German administration to hide what they didn't want the world to see. And that's very well recognized by historians, that was a deliberate ploy on behalf of the German government at the time, a legally elected, a legitimate German government, but had for whatever reason, it allowed them to continue with their mass murder without too much opposition until towards the end. Or to put another one, one maybe that maybe isn't quite so obvious. So if we were to describe, for example, a situation where there was a process whereby native Africans were transported to the Americas for employment in the agricultural industries. That's a nice, polite way to describe the horrors of the slave trade. But that's in fact what it was. If you wanted, you could describe it in that nice, polite way. And it sounds like a good thing. You're offering employment, you're taking people to see another part of the world. But it hides the real butchery and the barbarism and the brutality associated with it. And I'm afraid abortion is treated the same way by many of the proponents of abortion. So using phrases like termination of pregnancy doesn't sound quite so bad. Removal of the products of conception, removal of the pregnancy. You'll hear all of these terms. And then, of course, referring to the baby to dehumanize the baby in terms of the phrases that they use, like blobs of tissue or collections of tissue or collections of cells, blood clots, so on. And so it's important that we realize and we try to gain back the correct wording. Words are powerful, and words do have influence, whether we like it or not, on society and on the way people think, on the culture, and on the law. I looked at, before I came here, I looked up a number of definitions of abortion. So if you look up any of the standard dictionaries, Wikipedia, the sort of source of all knowledge nowadays, I just chose a few of them. For example, Wikipedia says, abortion is the ending of a pregnancy, okay, by removal or expulsion of an embryo or fetus before it can survive outside the uterus. So it's not incorrect, but they've left out one or two important issues. Again, it's not showing the true horror or the nature of the procedure itself. It's also slightly incorrect in that abortion can also occur when the baby is able to survive outside the uterus, as we know if they're aborted after 22, 24 weeks. When most of the majority of children at that stage could survive given the opportunity to do so. Cambridge Oxford Dictionary, so quite famous and one that would be well respected throughout the world, but its definition of abortion is the intentional ending of a pregnancy. Well, caesarean section is the intentional ending of a pregnancy, or induction of labour for medical reasons, obstetric reasons, before maybe the baby is naturally going to be born. They're all intentional endings of a pregnancy. So most of these definitions you'll see they don't make any attempt to describe the true nature of the process and the horrors associated. Some of you might realise that I come from Ireland, and I will refer to Ireland once or twice during this talk. We had an unfortunate referendum a couple of years ago, and as a result of that, abortion is now legal within Ireland. We don't know what the numbers are. The first year was from January 1st, 2019 until December 31st. The official figures haven't been released yet, but they will be by the end of June, so we'll know exactly how many abortions officially have occurred in the Republic of Ireland at that time. But I was interested that when it came, because there was a lot of debate even after the referendum had passed and within the Parliament of the Irish Dáil, there was a lot of debate as to the wording that there was going to have to put into the Constitution to make this above board and legal. And they chose first of all, abortion is not mentioned in one place whatsoever. It's referred always to a termination of pregnancy, which again in itself is concealing something. But apart from that, it's quite honest. It talks about, it defines termination of pregnancy as a medical procedure, that they go on to define that includes surgical and medical abortions. So a medical procedure with the intention of ending the life of a fetus. So at least they're acknowledging that there is a life there and it's an intentional ending of the life, which most of the other definitions don't try to address. They want to define fetus as including embryos and early stage pregnancies as well. So the intentional ending, with the intention of ending the life of the fetus. As I mentioned, words are very important, can be misused and are misused. They can also be misunderstood. As Isabel mentioned, I'm a cardiologist, but I try to, in my workplace, try to have some influence on particularly some of the junior doctors that I work with and some of my colleagues. So from time to time, without going overboard, get yourself a bad reputation doing that, without going overboard, I try from time to time to at least raise the issue, because most doctors, unfortunately, unless they're involved in abortion or heavily involved in pro-life movements, which unfortunately there aren't too many of us, most of them never think about this issue or don't want to think about this issue. So over the last couple of years, I've done a number of surveys within my own hospital to get opinion and mainly to try and spark debate, to make people think about these issues and hopefully to encourage them to engage in discussion. So last year, 2019, because again, a lot of you will know that just around the corner, about to hit us in this country, is a strong movement to try and decriminalise abortion. Abortion is still a criminal offence, by the way, in this country. A lot of people don't realise that. A lot of doctors certainly don't realise it. But it is allowed to be carried out under the terms of the Abortion Act. Now, we know that they're ignored largely, and abortions are, to a large extent, carried out, strictly speaking, illegally, but nevertheless are carried out according to the terms of the Abortion Act. But there is an attempt to decriminalise abortion, so it will no longer be considered a criminal offence, which in effect will mean abortion will be handed over for regulation, just as any other medical procedure, to the medical profession. Now, it's not going to be cardiologists or care of the elderly doctors or renal physicians who will be making the rules. It will be the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists. And their current leadership are very, very determined to make abortions seem as any other medical procedure. In fact, in the words of the recently retired former president of the college, it should be the same as having your bunion sorted. Another of her colleagues referred to it as having your tonsils taken out. So it will be handed over then to regulator, and they're determined that abortion will be available for any reason, without restriction, up to birth, if the mother wants that to happen, and if her doctor and another doctor agree for that to be carried out. And so there is a strong movement for total decriminalisation of abortion. So, going back to the survey, I deliberately chose the wording. I asked my colleagues in the process of doing the survey, in your opinion, and this was all one-to-one, face-to-face meetings, I asked them to fill out a form. I wanted them to keep it anonymous. I didn't want them to tell me what they wrote. In your opinion, should abortion be decriminalised? Now, that in itself led to a lot of discussion. Oh, I didn't realise abortion was a criminal offence, and then we could discuss the issue. So in your opinion, should abortion be decriminalised? And either why or why not, depending on whether they said yes or no. 110 people answered it. 3 people politely declined not to take part. So 110, which is roughly 47% of the workforce in the hospitals, almost half of the hospital workforce, mostly trainee doctors, junior doctors. a smaller number of consultants. Any idea what the responses might be? Yes or no? So should abortion be decriminalised? Yes or no? Simple as it is. 110. Anyone suspect that the majority would have said no, it shouldn't be decriminalised? Oh, we've got one brave person. So unfortunately, I was hoping that might be the case, but out of 110, 16, which was 15%, 14.5%, said no, it shouldn't be decriminalised. Whereas the other 96 out of 110, which is just over 85%, said yes, it should. However, I think the most interesting finding from the study, and it goes back to this old idea of words and how we interpret words, when they had filled in their form and folded it over neatly and handed it and put it into a bundle so I couldn't see what they'd written, I asked them a second question. I said, okay, so without telling me what you wrote, if I had phrased the question in a different way, so if I had said, in your opinion, should abortion be available for any reason without restriction up to birth, would that have changed your response? Now don't tell me what you wrote. And I was very, very surprised, but also very pleased to see that 95 of those who said it should be, because I know who they were, because the ones who didn't want it decriminalised were all declared to me. We had a long conversation, so I know of all the other people. So of the 96 people who said abortion should be decriminalised, only 5 of them felt that it should be available for any reason up to birth. Everybody else had, oh no, it can't be allowed on after 24 weeks, or no, it can't be except for a case of rape and incest, or no, it can't be, you can't have sex selection abortion, you can't have Down syndrome abortion. So they all had reasons why it shouldn't be available. So very, very few of the people I spoke to, and I think they're probably representative of doctors throughout the UK. So it shows, first of all, that they have a very poor understanding of what the law is and what the law means and what a change in the law is going to mean. But when it's actually put to them with a true description, a proper description of what's ahead of them if abortion becomes decriminalised, very, very few actually will support it. In fact, of those 5, only 2 of them were absolutely adamant that it should be a woman's choice regardless of any other conditions. 3 of them were maybe, probably wouldn't make much difference. It's also interesting, on a slightly different topic, the issue of euthanasia. New Zealand has recently voted in their parliament to have a referendum to let the people decide whether assisted dying should be introduced. And there was a poll done just 2017, just 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, where the population were asked, would you support assisted dying? Now, they're very careful again, assisted dying. Because good palliative care, good medical care actually helps people to die well, to die comfortably. So we're all involved, any doctors are involved in assisted dying, but they're very careful how they phrase it. If they say assisted suicide, that has different connotations, or euthanasia even more so. So would you support assisted dying, or a change in the law to allow assisted dying? That's how it was phrased. And 62% were strongly in favour of supporting a change in the law. But if that's 62%, when they were asked more specific questions, this is New Zealand, and it's probably, very similar, I would think, in this country. 85% of those who strongly supported believed that also included, for example, things like turning off life support machines, which is, available, and sometimes it's the right thing to do in the right situations. 79% felt it, or believed it also included doctors being allowed to write do not resuscitate forms, which again are sometimes very necessary to patients who are obviously dying, and you don't want to put them through unnecessary further suffering when there's absolutely no hope of successful resuscitation. So it showed that the general population were being misled by those who were proposing a change in the law for this reason. And I thought it was relevant to the abortion situation, and that's why I thought I wanted to mention it. I mentioned that words are very important. Words change the culture, they change the way people think, they change the way people behave, they can change the law. Now you could ask, and it has been asked, yeah, but we should be in the process of trying to change people's hearts and minds, regardless of what the law is. And that very same question was addressed to Martin Luther King, 1963, just a couple of weeks after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, where it was the early stages of the civil rights movement, and he was speaking to students in University in Michigan, and someone asked him that very question, but what's the point in changing the law? You have to just work on the people and change their hearts and minds. And he said, yes. It may not be possible by a change in the law to make a man love me, but it might stop him from lynching me, and I think that's pretty important. So the law has two effects. First of all, it protects the vulnerable, protects the weak. So the Abortion Act of 1967 in this country, protection for the unborn child was removed. If euthanasia or assisted suicide becomes available, protection for a lot of vulnerable people will also be removed. It has a second effect, that when the law is changed, that also, I said, the words influence people's way of looking at things. The law actually, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, it does influence the way people think. So something that was previously against the law and now becomes lawful, people start to think, a large proportion of people think, actually maybe it's not so bad after all. The law says it's okay. And doctors think the same way too. Prior to the 1967 Abortion Act, if you look at the General Medical Council and the rules for doctors and doctors' attitudes, the vast majority were against killing unborn children. But once that was passed, that all changed. It was a gradual process, so year by year it became more and more acceptable to become involved in those sort of processes. So changing the law does, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, at least for those reasons, can influence the way people think and behave. Hopefully, if there are changes in the law in the opposite direction, that can also turn back the clock. And that as a lot of you are probably aware that in the USA there's quite a battle going on in many states to try and overturn the abortion laws, to try and at least regain respect and value of respect for the value of unborn life and all life in general. Unfortunately, doctors, they're not all bad, but they have a greater than they should influence on the population. So again, if doctors are doing something, a lot of the people will be influenced by their doctor. What the doctor says is okay, it must be all right. That came across in the Irish referendum. I was speaking to my wife about this recently, and she reminded me, and I think she's probably right, that not too long ago, most of the Irish population would have been appalled at the idea of allowing abortion to be carried out in their hospitals. It was okay if women wanted to go to England, we're not going to stop them, but we did try that too. But we can't have it on Irish soil, Holy Island soil. That has changed though, and that was largely influenced, I believe, by a lot of the medical profession, unfortunately, in Ireland. There were small numbers of brave voices who tried to stand against the tide. But you had pretty eminent consultant obstetricians and leaders in other fields of medicine coming out saying that they wanted the 8th Amendment repealed so that abortion could become available in Ireland. And I think if doctors had come out in force talking against the introduction of abortion, then I think the referendum may well have gone the other way. We are seeing now, however, that about 10% of general practitioners, because most of them will be carried out, because most of them will be medical abortions carried out by GPs. About 10% have signed up to actually doing this. I mean, 90% of GPs. So there is some hope that even though the referendum was passed and doctors were either silent or largely supported it, not many of them are prepared to get involved. But I still suspect that when the numbers come out, there'll be about 5,000 officially performed abortions in Ireland over the last 12 months. I mentioned that doctors aren't always bad. It wasn't always that way. I mentioned Germany in the 1930s. After the war, there were a series of trials called the Nuremberg trials, where the leaders of the Nazi movement were put on trial if they were still alive. Some of them were sentenced to death. Some of them were sentenced to long, heavy prison sentences. Some were acquitted. But there was also a series of what they called doctors' trials. That was questioning, investigating the role that doctors played, and a lot of the German doctors, unfortunately, did sign up to the Nazi movement and the process of euthanasia and the experimentation on vulnerable groups and the destruction of the Jewish population. Doctors were involved and heavily implicated. So in an effort to overcome that, in 1948, the World Medical Association was formed. And this was largely as a result of the British Medical Association and its efforts to, along with collaboration from the French and one or two other countries in particular, to ensure that doctors never ever again would be involved in genocide or in crimes against humanity. And they formulated basically a new Hippocratic oath. Doctors don't actually take the Hippocratic oath nowadays. They used it in the past, but it had gone away or died away, and it was largely archaic language. But they formed a new Hippocratic oath based very much on the original ideas, but based on the respect for humanity. And it's called the Declaration of Geneva. And that the opening line was that I solemnly pledge myself to consecrate my life to the service of humanity. And there were a series of pledges in that declaration. The 8th pledge was, I will maintain the utmost respect for human life from the time of conception. And even under threat, I will not use my medical knowledge contrary to the laws of humanity. So I will maintain the utmost respect for human life from the time of conception. So 1948, and that remained the official declared oath of the World Medical Association, so doctors throughout the world, right up until 1983. So even after 1967, the Abortion Act in the UK, even after 1973, Roe v. Wade in the US, officially doctors throughout the world were declaring that they were maintaining respect for human life right from the moment of conception. 1983, they changed it slightly. The wording changed after a World Medical Association Congress. But it changed it to, I'll maintain the utmost respect for human life from its beginning. I'll come back to that in a moment. So that was a change, and it was obviously to appease countries that were already heavily involved in abortion procedures. In 2005, it was changed again, and I've no doubt why this was so. So it was changed from, I will maintain the utmost respect for human life from its beginning, to, I will maintain the utmost respect for human life, full stop. So we've gone from the time of conception to respecting it with the utmost respect from its beginning to just respecting human life. Because they can't bear to face what they've been heavily involved in, I believe to a large extent. There have been attempts in the last couple of years, particularly by Canada and the Netherlands, to change the World Medical Association's opposition to euthanasia, because they're heavily involved in that. And so far, at least, the World Medical Association, even though it's backed down on the abortion issue, so far it has held firm on condemning as unethical the practices of helping people to kill themselves and killing them deliberately by euthanasia. On that issue of, I mentioned in 1983, they changed the wording to, I will maintain the utmost respect for human life from its beginning. I think most people in this room would probably be of the same mind that life begins at conception. There's probably not too many dissenters from that. And so I thought a few years ago when I wanted to, this is the first survey I did back in 2016, again among my hospital, but a totally different cohort from the group that I did last year, different people involved, 113 responses. The question I asked, when in your opinion does human life begin? And I thought that would be a nice way to encourage people to think about the issue, because it's not something that doctors are too concerned about. And I left it an open book. They could put down whatever they wanted. They could and they could write little comments if they wanted to. One person, one lady surgeon who was very enthusiastic about it, said, "Oh, this is a great question. This is a great question." And I said, "I don't want to see what you write. Don't show me." But no, I want to tell you. And she wrote down after the dinosaurs. She thought I said, when did human life begin? But my question was a little bit more philosophical and maybe theological. So we put that one aside as that was with others. So some people said they don't know. The majority said it began at conception. However, that was only 38%. So 62% of doctors with medical degrees and a science and a medical background behind them do not believe or do not know that life begins at conception. The second largest group, which is 35%, so just a little bit behind conception, was birth. So the two widest extremes, so conception, birth, that you would possibly think of, had the two most popular answers on that occasion. Then I thought the viability to sort of 22, 24 weeks would have gained more support, but that was only, I think, around 17 to 20%. But again, it struck me that doctors don't know these things, or for some reason they deliberately sort of put it to the back of their minds and they don't want to face that. Because if they believe that life begins at conception, that has implications. It should have implications on the way they behave, on the way they practice. And some of these people were going on to become general practitioners. Some would be put into the field of obstetrics and other areas. I could talk about, I'm not going to, but I could talk about lots of the effects of abortion, because abortion affects so many people. It affects obviously the mother, it affects the child, it affects the father, it affects the families, it affects society as a whole, it affects the abortionist, it affects everybody working in the abortion clinic, the administrators, the nursing staff, the cleaners, everybody's affected by it. So it will have profound effects along the lines, in some cases more than others. I could talk about the potential harmful effects, mental health problems, for example, and there are people in this audience, I'm sure, who know far more about that than I do. I could talk about the possible link with breast cancer and maybe other cancers that is strongly denied by the abortion industry, but there is certainly evidence that it's there. The mental health link is pretty powerful, and that has been very much brought down. However, I'm deliberately not going to do that, at least not in the main part of the talk. I want to quote, I've left a few books at the back at the end, and one of the best books that I would highly recommend on the question of abortion was written by Father John Powell, S.J., in 1981, who was at the time, he was a very famous speaker, writer, very popular until he became involved in the pro-life movement. And he wrote a terrific book called Abortion, the Silent Holocaust. He just almost died of sadness when the news came through in 1973 of the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. He just couldn't believe that protection for the unborn child was now just wiped away for the whole nation in one swoop. And he deals with that, and he does a lot of references to genocide of the past. But also he talks a lot about mercy and love, charity, and how we can try to overturn this catastrophe. But in that, I was struck by one of the comments he made. And he said, I personally regret any argument against abortion that is based only on what abortion will lead to. So that could include things like mental health problems, which are very important, and we don't want to belittle that, and breast cancer and other cancers and breakdown of society. But abortion itself is the great tragedy. So in itself, the fact that we're choosing deliberately to kill human beings in this way, it's not wrong only because of what it will lead us to. It is a monstrous evil in itself. And I think he's right, because I think when I think of it, I think the pro-abortion groups, that's what they want. They want to deflect from the real issue. The real issue is that the humanity of the unborn child. They don't want us to concentrate on that, because they know that if we do, and if society gets to see what abortion really is and what it does, it could affect their business. They want us to talk about breast cancer, because they can come up with other figures to dispute that, saying, well, no, if you look at this study from there, that's not quite true. Or they'll deflect using the mental health issues. They'll deny the claims that we have good evidence for, but they'll always find some clever way to shout down the claims that we might make. So I think if we're to be successful in this area, I think we have to try and convince ourselves and others of the humanity of the unborn child and the terrible process of what abortion really is. Deliberately killing unborn children. And then we can talk about it then in addition to the other effects, but we should never allow ourselves to be deflected from that key issue. We shouldn't inflict our beliefs on other people. They're not going to annoy us. If we don't want to have an abortion, we don't have to have an abortion. However, I think we have not only we have an obligation, we have a mandate, we also have an obligation to become involved in human rights issues, and particularly in this, the most important of all human rights issues. Again, to quote Martin Luther King, I don't have a mobile phone, by the way. I use a diary, so from one to write things, this is very effective. But the particular diary I have is lots of little phrases, because this is Rhythm of the Seasons by St. Paul Publications, and each week there's a little phrase that can be a little thought for the week. And a couple of years ago, there was a quote which was attributed to Martin Luther King. It was, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." And I thought, that's great, that's very deep, I must write that down, I'm going to use that in the future. So I looked it up. He didn't actually say those words. It's a paraphrase of something that he did really say, which is far more powerful, I think. In a speech that he made on the 8th of March 1965, and I know that because it's 5 days before I was born, in Selma, Alabama. Some of you will know about the incident in Selma. That was the incident that probably more than anything else raised the issue of the civil rights campaign and the brutality that the white forces, police forces, were using to keep the black population down because of the brutality at an incident outside Selma, Alabama, when they were marching or attempting to march from Selma to Montgomery on a prophetic march. Nobody was killed on that day, although some people died shortly afterwards. But on the day after the initial march, which was on a Sunday, so on the Monday, he made a speech where he said, a man dies when he refuses to stand up for that which is right. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for justice. A man dies when he refuses to take a stand for that which is true. And I thought that's even more powerful than the initial quote I had. And of course, it's a reflection of the message of Christ in the Gospels. Even if we take, for example, the Good Samaritan, Christ shows us how we are to deal with the vulnerable, the oppressed, those who are in need. But at the end of it, because it's a very clever ploy he uses, because he tells the story of the Good Samaritan in response to a question that he's asked by the young lawyer who wants to justify himself. And who, Lord, is my neighbour? And then at the end, after he tells the story of the Good Samaritan, he says, so which of these three, so the two had passed by and then the Samaritan who had looked after the beaten up man, which of these three do you think proved himself to be a neighbour to the man? And the answer is the Samaritan. So, but his response was then, okay, well, go therefore and do likewise. So he's telling us that we have a duty, if we want to be Christians, if we want to be followers of him, to look after those in need, to look after the vulnerable, to not ignore human rights issues. It's even more terrifying if you look at the Matthew 25, the talk about the final days, when how are we going to be judged? So we're not necessarily going to be judged on the number of times we've gone to Mass or said prayers or did certain holy things. They're very important. But ultimately we're going to be judged on how we treated our neighbour. And did we treat it with Christian values? And I think the issue of abortion very much comes into that. Did we care enough to do something or to try to do something to protect the vulnerable, to protect those who are being persecuted? There is a risk in all of this. Are we okay for time? Okay. There's a risk in all of this because a lot of people won't like you. They won't like us for what we're doing. I had the privilege that there's a politician in America called Rick Santorum. He went for president one time, but he wasn't. He didn't get the nomination. But he was a senator in Massachusetts. And I was at a meeting where he was given the keynote address. And initially in his career, because he was afraid to offend people, he didn't become too much involved in pro-life issues. But when he had a handicapped daughter born himself, that soon changed. And especially with his wife, who was very much involved in pro-life issues. And he told the story of he used to go down and do a lot of campaigning in the southern states, because he knew he'd get support if he was a pro-life politician down there. But everywhere, like the all southern Baptist states. And after meetings, people would come and shake his hand and thank him, and they'd say to him, okay, Senator, what's your verse? He said, well, what do you mean? Well, what's your verse? And anyone who's seen the Shawshank Redemption will know that in the context of Southern Baptist, the verse is, what verse from the Bible do you use to live your life by? So Andy, the hero in the Shawshank Redemption, it says, the truth will set you free. And that's a sort of tongue-in-cheek remark to the governor that he's going to get out of here sooner or later. And the truth will be revealed. But Rick Santorum thought about it. He said, I don't have a verse. I'm a Catholic. We don't do that sort of stuff. But they wouldn't take no for an answer. So eventually he said he was just reading the scriptures one day and he banged the table and he came across it. He said, John 15:18. And nobody none of the Catholics, it was a Catholic convention or a congress we were at, nobody knew what he was talking about. John 15:18. We all know John 3:14, etc. 15:18. That's what the quote where Jesus says to his disciples, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. So we thought Rick Santorum thought that's the one for me. So at least he'll be on the good side of the Southern Baptists and the pro-life people if he uses that phrase, because it was very much true. A lot of people will not like the message that you try to get across in your prayer vigils, in your marches, in the things you might write, things you might say in public. You will get a lot of opposition. But you should rejoice and be glad when that does happen. It's always very disappointing when it evokes no response. The only time I've ever written a letter to the British Medical Journal was a few years ago, where a Spanish public health official wrote in a letter, because at the time there was a Spanish centre-right government that had declared it was going to try to restrict abortion access. That's all changed in Spain now, the socialist government. And this public health official was decrying this. This was a terrible thing for Spain. It was going to lead to more backstreet abortions and women not able to obtain the services that they need. And his line was that abortion is, after all, mostly a public health matter. And I decided I can't let that go, so I wrote to the BMJ, and I said that it's partially a public health matter. There are some public health implications from abortion, but I said above all, it's an ethical matter concerned with the value of human life, and what are some lives? Do we consider some lives to be more important than others? I was hoping that would provoke a response, that people would get involved and there'd be a long debate and I'd have to write lots of letters, but not a single word. So it's always very disappointing actually when we don't get any opposition. So we should rejoice when people are opposed, because it means that we're having some influence. If people see us as a threat, that we're obviously gaining some ground. And John Powell, to quote him again, he makes it very interesting. When he started on the pro-life circuit, he decided in 1976 he was going to do nothing but talk about pro-life issues. All his meetings, if he was invited to give a talk anywhere, he was always going to insist it was going to be about abortion and the value of the human person. And that didn't go down very well. A lot of people sort of said, okay, well, maybe we won't have you this time, Father Powell, thank you very much. And so he became very unpopular. And then when people did allow him to speak, he'd get a lot of reaction and people would come up to him afterwards. And he mentioned on one occasion that he had to say to someone that, he said, you're making people very uncomfortable. He said, well, I consider it a very important part of my vocation to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. I think that's a good phrase as well. We ought to do it in charity, of course. We don't want to sort of hurt people too much, but don't be afraid to hurt their feelings when you're standing up for the truth. A lot of you know Robert Barron, Bishop Robert Barron, who's current auxiliary bishop in the Los Angeles area. And one of his recent books, To Light a Fire on the Earth, so it's about evangelism. And he quotes a famous evangelical, a British-born, Welsh-born evangelical Christian called David Barrett, who was apparently worldwide. I'd never heard of him before until I read Robert Barron's book. But he was very well known for his research that he did into evangelism and how to spread the gospel. He was initially Church of England, but he became a devoted Southern Baptist, I think, later in life. And he tells a story that he was giving a talk one day to a group of very wealthy Christians, or people who consider themselves to be Christian, and they asked him the question, so Dr. Barrett, in your opinion, what is the most effective way that we can evangelize the world? And he looked at them and he said, well, I've done a lot of research into this, and there's no doubt in my mind that the most effective way to evangelize, to spread the gospel, is by Christian martyrdom. And there was silence, just as there is here now. And after a couple of minutes, one brave, wealthy businessman put up his hand and said, Dr. Barrett, in your opinion, what's the second most effective way to evangelize? That's a true story. In our efforts, be careful, because people will judge. They talk about us judging, we don't judge. We try not to judge. Spirit of love is a lovely phrase that Isabel used. But if we step out of line, people will, it can do irreparable harm to the pro-life movement. I became very much aware of it. I'm from Ireland, as you know. I did most of my early medical training in Ireland. Then most Irish doctors are expected to spend some time abroad. So I went to Europe. I went to Holland to do 2 years working in Holland in area of cardiology, interventional cardiology. But I was very conscious all that time because I was the only Irish person in that hospital, in that scene. And I was very nervous, even though I was reasonably good at what I was doing, but I felt that Ireland, my country, was being judged by my actions. So if I did something wrong, to say, the bloody Irish cardiologist, they can't do it. And it's true, people will judge you because you're part of a smaller community, and they'll judge the whole community on actions or things that you do or say. So just be aware of that the pro-life movement is on your shoulders. There's nothing worse or nothing more damaging, I think, than an angry response, an angry word. So be careful, because you will be provoked. People will try to provoke you. As happened, anyone who's been on the March for Life in recent years, well, the last one that was here in Birmingham, there certainly was a lot of provocation, and the ones in London, there's always a relatively small group of protesters of what we're doing. But you don't want to become involved in angry discussions. Always do everything with charity, because that's the only way ultimately to win souls, to change hearts and to change minds. There's a famous American priest called Father Larry Richards. Some of you probably might have heard his CDs and read his books and things. But he has a lovely story relating to the war. There was an American pilot shot down and captured by the Japanese and kept as a prisoner of war. Now, the Japanese weren't known for their kindness to prisoners, to Allied prisoners. So he was pretty brutally treated, but he was fed and he was given water and a little bit of shelter. However, in his cell, he shared a cell that he was kept in with a Japanese man who had collaborated with the Americans. And if the American was treated badly, the Japanese collaborators were treated far worse. So he was starved to death and beaten brutally every day, several times a day. So the American pilot tried as best as he could. He was a Christian. He wasn't Catholic, but he was Christian. Tried as best as he could to comfort this man. So he shared with him the little scraps of food that they gave him, a little bit of rice. He gave him water. He tried to nurse his wounds that he had day after day. But eventually the Japanese man was becoming more and more tired and was dying. And he knew that he was going to die soon. And he said to him one evening, "You're going to die." I don't know whether they conversed in English or in Japanese, but you're going to die, but you don't have to worry, because he felt that the only thing he hadn't given him was his faith. And he wanted to do that with him before he died. He said, "You're going to die, but you don't have to worry, because when you die, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Saviour, will be waiting for you, and he will welcome you into his arms to paradise, and there will be no more suffering, and you will be happy for all eternity." And the Japanese man looked at him and he said, "If Jesus Christ is anything like you, I can't wait to meet him." I think that's the bar. That's what we got to be aiming for. If Jesus Christ is anything like you, I can't wait to meet him. Can people say that about us? We have a duty. If we want to become involved, we have to educate ourselves to some extent. We have to at least know a little bit about the issues, to know what we're talking about. While we're not going to get involved in arguments, so we're not going to speak with anger to people, but we need to know a little bit about what we're talking about, because if we want to truly have some influence on those who aren't on our side at the moment, knowing the facts and knowing a little bit, I think, will be very helpful. And finally, I'd like to say, if we could pray for, there's a number of things I think we should pray for, but in particular, I think we need to pray for courage, which undoubtedly you all have. Pray for humility. Pray for wisdom. And above all, pray for charity. There's charity at the end of the day that will win souls for Christ and will change people's minds and hearts. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm happy to take it if anyone's any questions. I didn't say anything about the Catholic Medical Association, but if you want to. Any doctors here or medical students, you're very welcome to get involved. Sorry.
Sorry, as a cardiologist, what's your opinion of these American heartbeat pills?
The which, sorry?
The American heartbeat pills, they will stop abortion once the heartbeat can detect it.
About when the heartbeat begins? Yeah. Well, there is evidence that there is a primitive heartbeat from around 18 to 20 days after conception. Now, it's not a fully formed heart at that stage, but by 6 weeks there is a very well formed heart. So, like most of the early abortions will be performed around that time when there is actually a heart beating. Now, a lot of the American states are trying to bring in laws that if there's a detectable heartbeat, then abortion can't be allowed. And the politicians who are pro-life, they can only go so far, and they've been very, very good and very strong and courageous in this, and they've obviously taken a lot of slack, like states like Georgia and Missouri and maybe Louisiana, a few of them. But all the decisions they make in their parliaments and their legislation, they're all been overturned by their courts, because a lot of the judges who are in these positions have been there for probably from the Obama years or the Clinton years or something. And so every effort that's been made so far, at least a lot of them, have been overturned by these judges. But that could change if Roe v. Wade is changed. But certainly as a cardiologist, or just as a person who knows a little bit about these things, there's good evidence, and embryologists would be the best people, or people who study the embryo, the development of the embryo. They'll all agree that yes, there is a heartbeat from about 18 to 20 days. But it becomes a more established, properly working heart a few weeks later.
Do you know what they're being taught in medical school?
Sorry?
What are they being taught in medical school? The training doctors?
Are there medical students here? Oh, so she can answer that. Are you in Birmingham, or where are you?
Birmingham, yeah, UOB.
So what are you being taught in medical school?
We have this ethics module, and as part of my ethics module, we had all of these different stories, emotional stories about women who had to travel all the way to England to get an abortion.
From Ireland.
Yeah. So it's all very much like emotionally focused on the woman. When it comes to terms, we're told to refer to the child as products of conception or pregnancy tissue. We had a group discussion on abortion, which was kind of a debate style. I chose not to go because I thought I might be thrown out. So.
When I was in medical school, I was in UCD in Dublin, which was the original Catholic University of Ireland. That's changed now. But at the time, this was in the 1980s, we were taught that life began at conception and that every human being was of equal value. Abortion, of course, was...
in the syllabus anymore?
in UCD, I doubt it very much. I know in Newcastle, there's Newcastle Medical School, they don't get taught, because I made it my business. When every year I have to do an induction with the new doctors, the new F1 doctors. And I have to talk to them about cardiac emergencies, which is fine. It takes about an hour. But I always leave 5 minutes at the end to talk about conscientious objection. There's always one person, because I have to write these evaluations and things afterwards, and there's always one person who writes a little comment, thank you for what you said at the end, or something like that. Or so one person will come up to me and say, thanks for telling us that. So it's just a little effort to let them know that I don't mention abortion, I don't mention contraception, IVF, but I said that there will be ethical issues that some of you will find troubling. And you have the right, you must be told that you have the right to not take part in something that goes against your conscience. I said whether it be for religious reasons or moral reasons or any other reason that's of your choosing, you do not have to do something that goes against your conscience. And most of them probably don't care, but some do.
Hope it's more like you.
Well, maybe. God help them.
In reality, does that work though? I'm a nurse and I know people who've lost their job and they've actually used conscientious objections.
It does work, and at the moment I'm involved in a couple of, I just had a phone call last week and a couple of emails around it. A young nurse in Dundee who has been put in that situation. She's from Poland, but she's been working in Dundee for a good few years. And she's an emergency care nurse, emergency theatre nurse. So traditionally she had to deal with road traffic accidents or emergency medical problems, surgical problems that arise. But in the last 2 years, there's been a change in the way things are done in her region. So now, gynecology emergencies, which used to go to a specific gynecology theatre, now they come to her general theatre. And she informed me that a number of the abortion doctors, they use the excuse that, oh, this is an emergency abortion. That there's no such thing as emergency abortion. There are very, very rare situations where the child and the products of conception, if you want to call it the placenta and the amniotic fluid, might have to be removed ahead of schedule. And that's very, very rare. The only situations I can think of might be if there's a severe septic abortion, but the child is dying anyway, not going to survive. And if it's already 22, 24 weeks, there's a possibility that the child might survive, but with the severe sepsis infection, it probably won't. But no matter what the stage of pregnancy, every effort should be made, and certainly the Catholic teachings, every effort should always be made to save both mother and child. You obviously can't let the mother die. If the mother dies, the child's going to die anyway. So you have to do everything you can to try to save both. But there are some very rare situations where it might be too premature, so it might be 14, 15, 16 weeks. As for example, the Savita Halappanavar case in Ireland that some of you would be aware of. She didn't die because abortion wasn't available in Ireland. What she died of was badly treated sepsis. And all the provisions were there that the doctors who looked after it could have, if they had chosen to do so, delivered her baby knowing that the child was going to die, because she was around 18, 19 weeks, I think. But they could have tried to save both her and the child if they had treated her correctly. And the law at that time allowed her to do that. So that case was badly misused or deliberately misused by the pro-abortion group to influence the Irish population. And a lot of doctors were involved disgracefully in misleading the people as to what actually happened in that case. But apart from that, there are very, very rare situations. In fact, if I just have a minute, could I just say? I gave a talk a few years ago at a meeting on one of the higher risk, because there are some pregnancies that are high risk. I mean, don't belittle that. It's like some women do have a higher risk pregnancy than others. Most women don't have any major problems during pregnancy. But there are a number, and they're all cardiac related. All the high risk things are cardiac related. There's one in particular called pulmonary hypertension. There are some, in this country, there will be some women who will be pregnant with pulmonary hypertension. Now, if you read that's a condition where you've got excessive pressures in the small blood vessels in the lungs, and it puts the heart under a lot of strain, because blood is flowing from the right side of the heart into the lungs. So if the lungs are under strain, you're going to get this risk of heart failure. But it is treatable to some extent, and it's caused by a number of different conditions. But if you read any of the textbooks, any of the medical textbooks, obstetric textbooks, nursing textbooks, they'll all say the only situation, or the only solution to the situation is termination. They'll all say that, because they'll quote, not studies, but they'll quote papers that say that there's a 60% mortality rate, and that not very few will survive. However, they're basing all these statistics on just small numbers of cases, anecdotal situations from the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. Whereas we have very good treatments for pulmonary hypertension. And there's a wonderful lady in Wisconsin in the US called Diane Zwicky, who's a cardiologist with a particular interest in this area. She was a former nurse who went into this. She's not a Catholic. I don't think she's particularly religious in any sense. But she offers to women with pulmonary hypertension who are pregnant, if they come to her, she will do everything she can to save her, the mother and the child. And she has this very specific, very tight protocol, which is very, very successful. It involves a lot of very intensive monitoring. That's the main thing too, because she recognises there are about 3 or 4 key stages of the pregnancy where there's a particularly high risk. And if you can monitor the mother at those times, you can anticipate problems that might arise and be ready to deal with them very, very quickly. And she's published 175 consecutive cases of no deaths, no maternal deaths, no fetal deaths, no baby deaths. Now that's a far cry from 50-60% mortality. Going on from that, a group in Sheffield, that's Royal Hallamshire in Sheffield, a much smaller case series, but in fact they were the first in the world to publish them. They got 10 successive women, 11 pregnancies, one woman became pregnant twice, where again with this severe pulmonary hypertension, and they gave them this very specific treatment, close monitoring, and over the course of the 11 pregnancies, not a single death, either mother or child. So it is possible if people are prepared to make the effort, and that's the highest risk. That's the highest. There are other ones which pose a risk, but much less so. I myself had a case just a few years ago where a young woman, 33 years of age, collapsed in our local shopping centre called the Metro Shopping Centre. I haven't been to the Metro Shopping Centre. It used to be Europe's largest, biggest centre, the Metro Centre. And she collapsed there, and she was unconscious for 12 minutes before they got a defibrillator to her and successfully resuscitated her. She was taken to our hospital because we were the closest one. And she survived, and within 24 hours she was out of intensive care. She was on my ward, cardiology ward. I was looking after her. Her baby was scanned, baby was fine. She was pregnant. She was 13 weeks pregnant at the time. And I kept her on my ward. Now, we did a scan of her heart, and she had severe heart failure. We didn't know initially, was it because of the cardiac arrest that she developed severe heart failure, or was it a pre-existing condition that she hadn't known about that caused her to arrest. And as it turned out, that's what it turned out to be, although we didn't know that initially. So we treated her with drugs that were safe in pregnancy, beta blockers, and we were obliged to get her a defibrillator. She had to have an internal defibrillator. It would have been negligent not to arrange for her to have that. Now, we don't do them in our hospital, and I had to refer her to, I work in Gateshead, I had to refer her to Newcastle across the water. And she stayed with me about 4 weeks, so she's already 17, coming up to 18 weeks pregnant at this stage. Everything was going fine. We scanned her a couple of times. Her heart hadn't improved. Our baby was scanned, and the baby was doing fine. And I sent her to the hospital in Newcastle, presuming that the next time I would see her, she would be coming back to our heart failure clinic, and we'd follow her up very closely. But I was very upset and disappointed. 2 weeks later, I got a letter to say that when she got over to the other hospital, they got her seen by an obstetrician who arranged for her to have an abortion the next day. And then the next day she had an MRI scan, which they could do now that she wasn't pregnant. And then she had her ICD put in. I was very upset, and I wrote a letter to the people involved, but the response I got was very unsympathetic. It was, "Oh, nobody here would agree with your stance in this issue. The only option was to offer a termination." Now, I had a lot of discussions with her and her mother prior to that, and I reassured them that, you know, everything's going to be okay. Your baby will be fine. We look after you. If there's any change in your condition, we will arrange for you to have the baby delivered, you know, sooner rather than later, like they had a schedule, if and when the need arises, knowing that could happen before the child might reach viability. But I was pretty confident she would get at least to 24, 26 weeks. Going on to 40 weeks would have been a bit of a risk, but we could have got her to certainly to 30 weeks, I would think, and then there was a very good chance that both mother and child would have survived. So it was very disappointing, but that's sort of that's the beliefs we're up against. And I'm trying to, and other people in the Catholic Medical Association are trying to overcome that and to show people that, hey, there is another way here. Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, I cut you.